it water with the sheep in the box?
I know it may come as a shock, but sometimes conservative politicians and media figures lie about their true intentions and beliefs in order to save face, as is becoming more and more clear as people like Tucker Carlson's head writer, Trump's chief advisor Stephen Miller, and everything Boris Johnson's ever said and done are revealed to actually be incredibly racist, kind of proving the point that maybe a lot of their beliefs are actually based in prejudice and beliefs that seem to contradict those that they claim to hold. Plus, of course, there's the fact that crypto-fascists fit very neatly into the existing conservative frameworks. Nick Griffin's father, for example, was previously a Conservative Party councillor, Nick Griffin of course being the leader of the BNP, and is probably most famous for being completely humiliated on live TV one time and then getting caught explaining to a group called Friends of the BNP, which included members of the KKK, that his strategy going forward was to stop being overtly fascist because nobody wanted to vote for fascism, but they would vote for crypto-fascist ideas like identity.
Which is the untrue quote that's been said about you? The Holocaust denial, possibly?
The vast majority of them. Far too many to go into, but...
Well, let's just go to denying the Holocaust, France. Did you deny the Holocaust?
I did not have a conviction for Holocaust denial.
But you did deny it. Why are you smiling? It's not a particularly amusing issue.
You'd be surprised how many people will ever whip round to buy you a ticket and your supporters to go... Go to the South Pole, it's a colourless landscape, it will suit you fine.
There's a difference between selling out your ideas and selling your ideas. And the British National Party isn't about selling out its ideas, which are your ideas too, but we are determined now to sell them. And that means basically to use these saleable words, as I say, freedom, security, identity, democracy. Nobody can criticise them. Nobody can come at you and attack you on those ideas. They are saleable. Perhaps one day, once by being rather more subtle, we've got ourselves in a position where we control the British broadcasting media, then perhaps one day the British people might change their mind and say, yes, every last one must go. Perhaps they will one day. But if you hold that out as your sole aim to start with, you're going to get absolutely nowhere. So, instead of talking about racial purity, talk about identity.
Honestly, if he'd have just waited a few years and started a YouTube channel, he would have been way ahead of his time. Oh, and as it turns out, the far-right love Boris Johnson to the point where Britain First, a far-right pressure group, one of the members of which literally murdered a politician who opposed Brexit while shouting the name of the organisation, urged members to vote Tory for the first time in 2019. Anyway, the point here is that, obviously, there is some overlap between fascists and conservatives. Yeah, no shit, they're both on the right just in the same way that liberals have a few things in common with communists. What's the point here? Well, what if I said that as the Overton window has been shifting further and further right, so have the mainstream conservative pundits and politicians? What if they've shifted so far right, the conservative ideals they claim to care so much about are no longer representative of their actual views, but are instead a lie they have to maintain in order to avoid describing their actual views, which are really rather different? What if I argued that actually this reveals a very significant flaw in conservative beliefs, and that they were always built on elaborate hypocrisies, but most people just never noticed? What if I could successfully argue that the core tenets of conservative thought are in no way applicable to modern conservatism? First, we would need a definition and a rundown of the main ideals of conservative thought, which thankfully we have people like Ben Shapiro to define for us.
Conservative, as in limited government, individual freedom, traditional values, free enterprise. Scary topics, right?
Let's begin, shall we?
Yeah, you know what it is. Black and yellow, black and yellow, black and yellow, black and yellow. Yeah.
This is probably the longest section, so let's get it out of the way first. Conservatives do not believe in limited government. Conservatives overwhelmingly vote for expansion of military budgets, nuclear arsenals and police forces, including the mass militarization of the police, as we're seeing right now with the fucking military-grade weaponry and equipment being used against innocent peaceful protesters, the massive subsidies and tax breaks they give to multinational corporations, refusal to crack down on lobbying, and so on and so forth. You get the point. It's very interesting to me that people like Ben Shapiro, who, as we just saw, is against limited government, is still in support of the death penalty.
I think the death penalty exists for a couple of reasons on a purely secular level. So, without quoting the Bible and, if you shed blood by man, shall your blood be shed and all that. The secular rationales for the death penalty are twofold. One is the supposed deterrence effect. I actually think that one is less important than the second one, which is that there is a certain amount of retributive justice that is necessary for a society to function. As far as the morality, I really don't think the two are in any way similar. I think that if you kill, if you rape and kill a child, you should die. If you're an innocent child in the womb, you should not. It's pretty simple logic there. As far as the efficacy of the death penalty in the United States, I think there are serious questions to be asked whether the death penalty is properly applied in the United States. In my opinion, it's not applied consistently or enough. If you're going to actually apply it, you have to apply it. You can't do this routine where people stay on death row for 40 years, and even then, it's unevenly applied. I think the best case to be made for abolition of the death penalty is not a moral case, it's a government sucks at everything case, because I'm always warm to that case, because the government sucks at everything.
He does pay lip service to this contradiction and says that there's an argument against it due to government incompetence, but ultimately says that he morally believes that people like rapists and murderers deserve to die. And you know, that's a fair point, and obviously it's his opinion. But this is the same guy who likes to attempt to own people online by saying,
"These are facts, and facts don't care about your feelings,"
but places his feelings over not only the apparently incredibly important conservative idea of limiting government power, but also the verifiable facts and evidence demonstrating that the death penalty is an ineffective method of deterrent, and also a terrifyingly high number of innocent people die each year due to having been wrongly convicted. In fact, the only time people like Shapiro actually seem to really care about limiting government is when it comes to things like welfare programs, food stamps, healthcare, just, you know, things that help poor people. Conservatives are more than happy to accept massive government expenditure when it comes to subsidizing private companies, hiring Richard Branson to make the NHS worse, and of course ceremonial shit like royal weddings, or pissing money up the wall for Trump to go on his many golfing vacations. But the moment a family living in poverty dares to take the meager amount of money they require to survive, or a disabled person wants to not die, nope, fuck you, the poor. Go starve to death, and your kids too. We need that money to maintain nuclear weapons we'll never use. In order to be consistent, people like Ben would necessarily need to be against funding ongoing state violence, like for example supporting police reform, opposing tax breaks and subsidies for the rich and corporations, and yes, defunding the police and the military, but they don't, do they? I have yet to see any conservatives marching with BLM calling for defunding of the police, supporting the engaging in war crimes and incredible amounts of unprecedented and in many cases unprovoked violence against peaceful protesters. No, that seems more like an overwhelmingly left-wing thing, right? You know, the left wing who supposedly want more and more state control over our lives are the ones opposing the apparatus that enforces state violence, and the people who supposedly want to restrict state control are the ones supporting it. Further, the US has the highest level of military expenditure on the planet, propped up and supported by conservatives above all. Why would someone who apparently believes in limited government, who loses their shit over the idea of not being able to buy a bazooka at Walmart or whatever, be in any way, shape or form okay with the state being able to enact incredible violence upon its citizens, not to mention citizens of other countries which might have oil? Or how about the government being able to keep desperate refugees in concentration camps and deliberately poison them for shits and giggles? Is that not government overreach, or is that in fact totally okay and absolutely in line with limited government thinking? Likewise, when it comes to privatizing of industries, the Conservatives are more than happy to die on the hill of limited government, saying the government shouldn't have that kind of power, and if the state ran the healthcare system, doctors would be forced to work and become slaves. But the fact that private prisons often force prisoners to perform unpaid labour, using a loophole in the Constitution to justify it, doesn't seem to faze them. It's almost as if when Conservatives say limited government, they actually mean I want to pay less taxes towards keeping vulnerable people alive, but I'm totally fine with state-sanctioned murder and abuse of poor, black, disabled and LGBTQ+ people, but I'm not a bigot. Look, I'm not doing anything, I'm just letting it happen. I'm voting for people who make it happen and perpetuate these policies. Almost as if the limited government thing is a cynical but deliberate hypocrisy based on victimizing and literally killing the poor and vulnerable based on bigotry and a superiority complex. Either you're in support of a limited government, or you're opposed to funding the police and fully stand behind the BLM protests. This isn't something you can compromise on. Either you believe in the core tenet of limited government, or you don't. And in my experience, most conservatives simply don't. You know who does though? Anarchists, who are generally very far left, unless you take people like ANCAP seriously, which nobody should, and make up the bulk of groups like Antifa, but again, conservatives hate anarchists, even though in theory they should have the exact same short-term goals of limiting government power. Weird that.
Yeah, you know what it is. Black and yellow, black and yellow, black and yellow, black and yellow. Yeah.
The US has the largest prison population on the planet, and conservatives not only helped create the situation through things like the drug war and allowing the proliferation of private prisons, which inevitably led to judges getting bribed to fill quotas, but it's inevitably conservatives who vote to both maintain and expand this system. Conservatives voted to stop prisoners getting the vote, voted to expand the prison industrial complex, introduced mandatory minimum sentences, refused to appeal the 13th Amendment, which continues slavery among the prison population, refused to listen to activists arguing advocating for police abolition and reform and still oppose the legalization of marijuana or indeed a number of other equally harmless drugs, even though it's been repeatedly demonstrated that the drug war is a failure. Drugs like weed are basically harmless to a majority of people, certainly less dangerous than alcohol, and are the main reason why America's prisons are so full. Other countries have tried these things, by the way. Norway's prison system is one of the most lenient in the world, focuses almost entirely on rehabilitation, and provides prisoners with an unprecedented amount of freedom, and yet has just 20% recidivism rate, whereas the US, with its brutal, cramped, genuinely awful prison system which allows for abuse and fucking slavery, has a recidivism rate of 80%. Likewise, Portugal legalized all drugs in 2001 and has seen a dramatic decrease in overdoses, HIV infections, and drug-related crimes due to the focus on recovery over punishment. The information is out there, so where are the Conservatives fighting for prison reform or drug legalization? You can't say you're all for individual freedom if you support concentration camps and harmful drug laws that will lead to massively inflated prison populations, even after you've been shown proof that they don't work. Sorry.
Yeah, you know what it is. Black and yellow, black and yellow, black and yellow, black and yellow. Yeah.
I'm not going to labour on this particular point for too long because it's pointless due to the fact that the phrase traditional values means nothing and cannot be accurately defined. Depending on where you draw the line, slavery was traditional, being a hunter-gatherer was traditional, lynching black people is traditional, but obviously Conservatives don't mean that when they talk about tradition. This tradition bollocks is all just fucking horseshit and basically just means I hate LGBTQ+ people and women having freedom most of the time. The main point I want to make here is that this value is contradicted by the others. In order to enforce traditional roles, one would have to restrict individual freedoms of, for example, women, who I doubt would be too happy to return to an oppressive 1950s-style patriarchal society, which contradicts the previous point, and presumably the economy benefits from more workers and consumers, so wouldn't the concept of free enterprise require a possibility that traditional values may need to be sacrificed for profits? Likewise, it's free enterprise in the free market that slashed wages, forcing both members of a couple or household to be in full-time work and being too busy or too poor to afford children.
Yeah, you know what it is. Black and yellow, black and yellow, black and yellow, black and yellow. Yeah.
You can't believe in the free market if you want to compel companies to agree with you, and especially when you want to subsidize and bail out failing corporations or the super rich. More government money goes towards tax breaks, bailouts and subsidies than goes on almost any publicly funded utility or service, by the way, and is orders of magnitude higher than the amount of taxpayer money that goes towards, for example, unemployment or disability benefits. It's interesting to me that Conservatives claim to be pro-free enterprise and invisible hand of the market, pull yourselves up by your bootstraps, personal responsibility and all that shit when it comes to people using their job and being unable to feed their family or avoid starving to death or living on the street, which is why Conservatives see no issue with thousands of avoidable deaths of disabled and homeless people due to cuts to the DWP and homeless services, but lose their fucking minds if you suggest that maybe big businesses that fail in the free market should just be, allowed to fail in the same way that they want workers to. But once again, we see the double standards here. It's free enterprise for the poor, for the workers, and for the people who don't line the pockets of the rich and powerful, but those who do can expect big government bailouts and all the taxpayer money they like, and to top it off, their taxes will be slashed and due to fucked up accounting tricks, not only have to pay zero taxes on trillions of dollars of income, but also somehow get a tax rebate, meaning that the average American taxpayer paid Amazon to make $1 trillion and they didn't even have to give anything back or contribute to society in any meaningful way. Free enterprise is when the poor die because the government refuses to help them, but also give trillions of dollars in tax breaks to the super rich and bail them out if ever they need help, apparently.
Yeah, you know what it is. Black and yellow, black and yellow, black and yellow, black and yellow. Yeah.
Conservatives lie, but they either know this and are just fascists in blue ties. Yes, I know the colours are different in the US, fuck you, red is a socialist colour. Or they don't think that they do. They think that the ideology allows for these contradictions where it does not. Look, if you believe in abolishing the police, defunding the military, decommissioning nuclear weapons, stopping subsidies, bailouts and tax breaks for the super rich, abolishing prisons, and reshaping the entire prison industrial complex around rehabilitation and empathy over punishment, if you believe in legalising all drugs, abolishing ICE and closing the concentration camps, opening the borders and treating people with dignity and empathy, I respect you a whole lot, but are you really still a conservative at that point?